January 5th, 1965, the DMZ, a 25-year-old Army sergeant from the 8th Cavalry Regiment, steps into the frozen mud carrying a canteen, a pack of cigarettes, and a decision that will trap him inside Kim Il-sung's North Korea for the next 40 years. No defection papers, no weapons. Just a man who realized staying on his side of the line meant deployment to Vietnam, a jungle halfway around the world. The State Security Department captures him within hours. They don't execute him. They don't release him. They disappear him. By 2004, he'll have seen more of North Korea's inner workings than any American in history. And the U.S. military will let him walk away with nothing but a dishonorable discharge. The border behind him vanishes into snow. The border ahead is a wall of concrete and surveillance. He is alone in the most fortified zone on Earth, facing a regime that kills its own generals without blinking. Hundreds of scopes train on this strip of mud, but only one guard with a rifle is enough. His name is stripped from the Army rolls. His family is told he's gone. In Pyongyang, he becomes a number, a file in a cabinet. He is entering a country that doesn't exist on most maps, a nation built on secrets, and he is about to become the keeper of the biggest one. Why did both governments need him alive? And what did he see that made his survival worth more than his punishment? The truck ride was blind. Canvas flaps slapped against the metal frame, sealing out the snow. Jenkins sat on a wooden bench, handcuffed, listening to the engine hum and the tires crunch over frozen ruts. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what waited for him. He only knew that the cold behind him was gone, and the cold ahead of him was different. It wasn't weather. It was policy. It was systematic. It was designed to break people. And it had 40 years to work on him. The vehicle stopped. Doors swung open. Harsh light flooded the cargo space. A man stood there, silhouetted against the snow. He wore a uniform crisp enough to cut glass. No insignia, no name tag, just authority. This was Section Chief Min. He wasn't a guard, he was a manager. He looked at Jenkins like a farmer inspecting livestock. He didn't speak. He gestured. Jenkins stepped down into the snow. His boots sank inches deep. Min turned and walked toward a compound surrounded by walls, guarded by men who never smiled. Jenkins followed. He didn't have a choice. Inside, the air smelled of boiled cabbage and stale tobacco. Min led him to a room. Bare walls, a single bulb, a metal chair. Min sat opposite him. He opened a file. Jenkins' file. It was already thick. Photos from the border, reports from the patrol, transcripts of the capture. They hadn't just caught him. They had been watching him before he even crossed. Min spoke English. Perfect. Unaccented. "You are not a prisoner," Min said. "You are a guest." It was a lie. Jenkins knew it. Min knew he knew it, but the script had to be read. You will eat. You will sleep. You will work. Min closed the file. You will not try to leave. If you try to leave, you will die. If you try to hide, you will die. If you try to speak without permission, you will die. 3 conditions. 3 death sentences. Min stood up. He walked to the door. He paused. But if you cooperate, you will live. We have use for you. The door locked. The bolt slid home with a heavy clank. Jenkins sat in the silence. He wasn't in a prison camp. Not yet. He was in a laboratory. And he was the specimen. The State Security Department moved him away from the border, away from the war zone, into the interior, into the heart of the dictatorship. He was no longer a soldier. He was a resource. And resources are managed, not wasted. But here's what makes this terrifying. Jenkins wasn't the only American who crossed. 4 soldiers defected to North Korea in the 1960s. Jenkins was one of them. The other 3 were Larry Allen Abshir, James Joseph Dresnock, and Jerry Wayne Parrish. 3 men who made the same choice, walked the same path, stepped into the same frozen mud. By the time Jenkins escaped in 2004, all 3 of them were dead. They died inside North Korea. They died in the system. Jenkins was the only one who walked out. Why did he survive when the others didn't? What did he do differently? Or what did the regime let him do that they didn't let the others do? The U.S. Army marked him as lost. The North Korean state marked him as acquired. Both governments filed him away. Both governments assumed he was gone forever. They were wrong. Jenkins wasn't gone. He was being stored. And what happens when you store a witness for 4 decades? You give him time to see everything. You give him time to learn everything. You give him time to become the only American who knows what actually happens inside the walls. Min visited him weekly, sometimes monthly. He never raised his voice. He never struck him. He just checked the inventory. Jenkins was healthy. Jenkins was compliant. Jenkins was awake. That small act of restraint from the officers who captured him in the hook wasn't kindness. It was instruction. This wasn't a standard capture. This was an acquisition. And acquisitions come with instructions. What exactly did North Korea plan to do with an American soldier they didn't execute? And why would the U.S. Army let a deserter live for 40 years without coming after him? 5 a.m. The lock clicks. A bowl of gruel slides through the slot. Steam rises in the cold air. The smell of fermented cabbage and stale water fills the room. Jenkins doesn't eat immediately. He listens. Footsteps echo in the hall. Heavy, rhythmic, stopping at his door. A shadow blocks the light under the frame. He freezes, breathing shallow. The steps move on. This was the daily reality. Wake up, eat rice and kimchi, sit in a room, wait for instructions, repeat. The isolation was the weapon. No contact with the outside world. No news, no letters, no knowledge of what was happening in America. The Vietnam War raged. The Cold War shifted. Presidents came and went. Jenkins heard none of it. He existed in a vacuum, a bubble of North Korean time. And inside that bubble, the rules were simple. Obey, survive, don't try to escape. The stakes escalated quickly. In the first year, Jenkins learned what happened to prisoners who resisted. The State Security Department didn't hide the consequences. They showed them. Other detainees disappeared. Some came back broken. Some didn't come back at all. Jenkins understood the message. Compliance was the only currency that mattered. If he was discovered hiding information, if he was caught trying to contact outsiders, if he was found planning an escape. The punishment wasn't prison. It was torture, public execution, a warning to everyone else in the compound. But here's the paradox. Jenkins was watched constantly, but he was also given privileges. He wasn't starved. He wasn't beaten. He was treated better than the average North Korean citizen, better than the prisoners in the camps. Why? Because he was valuable. The regime realized quickly that a dead American was useless. A living American was a tool, a prop, a piece of evidence they could use against the United States. So they kept him alive. They kept him healthy. They kept him ready. The regime gave him work. Teaching English, translating documents, appearing in videos. Each task was a thread in the web. Each task tied him closer to the state. But each task also gave him access. He saw the instructors. He saw the students. He saw the materials. He learned how the propaganda machine worked. He learned who was in charge. He learned where the files were kept. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was an employee. And employees know things that prisoners don't. But keeping him alive meant using him. And that's when North Korea made their first mistake. They put him in front of a camera. They turned him into a symbol. They thought they were controlling the narrative. They thought they were using him to send a message to America. They didn't realize they were creating evidence. Every frame of film, every broadcast, every public appearance, it was all proof. Proof that he was alive. Proof that he was there. Proof that the regime was holding him. And proof that one day he might be able to use it against them. The daily life was claustrophobic. The walls felt closer every year. The guards felt heavier. The silence felt louder. Jenkins spent decades inside this trap, watching, waiting, learning. He didn't know it yet. But the regime was building his escape route for him. Every privilege, every job, every year of survival, it was all accumulating. It was all adding up. And when the bill came due, what happens when a regime tries to cash a check they can't cover? But here's the detail about the teaching. He wasn't teaching random students. He was teaching the children of the elite, the sons and daughters of the party officials who ran the State Security Department. They sat in his classroom. They asked him questions. They told him things their parents said at dinner. Jenkins was gathering intelligence without even trying. He was building a map of the regime's leadership from the inside out. And that map would become the key to his freedom. But he couldn't use it yet. He had to wait. He had to survive. And he had to hope the U.S. was still watching. How long could one man stay useful before the regime decided he wasn't worth the cost? And what would happen when North Korea finally tried to cash in on their American trophy? The Propaganda Bureau called him in. They didn't ask, they told. Jenkins arrived at a studio in Pyongyang. Lights, cameras, scripts. He was given lines to read. Anti-American rhetoric. Condemnations of the U.S. military. Confessions of crimes he didn't commit. He read them. He looked into the lens. He said the words. The cameras rolled. The tapes were shipped to schools, to factories, to military bases. Every North Korean schoolchild saw Charles Jenkins. Every citizen knew his face. He was the American who betrayed his country. He was the proof that capitalism failed. He was the asset. But here's what the Bureau didn't understand. Every film he made created evidence of his existence. Every broadcast created a record. The regime wanted visibility. They wanted to show the world they had an American deserter. They wanted to use him as a trophy. But trophies can be counted. Trophies can be tracked. Trophies can be demanded back. Jenkins appeared in propaganda films shown to every North Korean schoolchild. His face was everywhere. His voice was everywhere. He was the most famous American in North Korea, and he was completely trapped. The classroom was already a trap. Now the camera added another layer. He taught the same students, but now the cameras were rolling. He sat in classrooms. He corrected grammar. He answered questions. He built relationships. These weren't friendships. They were connections. They were access points. He learned who held power. He learned who made decisions. He learned where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. The State Security Department thought they were monitoring him. They didn't realize he was mapping them. The stake escalation was subtle, but deadly. If his propaganda value diminished, he became disposable. The regime didn't keep pets. They kept tools. If a tool breaks, you replace it. If a tool stops working, you discard it. Jenkins knew this. He saw what happened to other foreigners. He saw what happened to other assets. When they weren't useful anymore, they vanished. So he had to stay useful. He had to stay visible. He had to stay valuable. Every day was a performance. Every word was a calculation. Every smile was a survival tactic. His propaganda value was worth more than his punishment. The U.S. wasn't letting him go out of mercy. They were waiting for what he knew. Remember the question from the hook. Why did both governments need him alive? The army marked him as a deserter. They could have prosecuted him. They could have imprisoned him. They could have executed him. But they didn't. They waited. They watched. They knew that a prisoner in North Korea was worth more than a prisoner in Fort Leavenworth. They knew that Jenkins was seeing things no spy could ever see. They knew that time was on their side. So they let him stay. They let him live. They let him become the ultimate insider. The regime needed him visible enough to use, but controlled enough to not escape. It was a balance. Too much freedom and he runs. It's too much control and he breaks. Jenkins walked the line. He performed. He complied. He survived. He spent years in this state. A puppet on a string. But puppets can see the puppeteer, and Jenkins was watching. He was learning. He was waiting for the string to loosen. For 15 years, he survived alone. Then in 1980, North Korea gave him something they never intended to give any foreigner. It looked like victory. It was a family. They arranged a marriage, not to a North Korean citizen, not to a willing partner, to another captive. Her name was Hitomi. She was Japanese, she was abducted, and she was the key to everything. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't alone. He had a wife, a home, a semblance of normalcy. It felt like victory. But the regime thought giving him a family would make him more controllable. They thought it would tie him down. They thought it would make him dependent. They were right. It gave him something to lose. It gave him a reason to risk everything. It gave him a team. The propaganda films continued. The teaching continued. The surveillance continued. But the dynamic shifted. Jenkins wasn't alone anymore. He had Hitomi. He had children. He had a stake in the future. The regime thought they were adding weight to the anchor. They didn't realize they were adding fuel to the fire. The asset was no longer just a tool. The asset was a father. And fathers do things that single men don't do. They take risks. They make plans. They fight. But what happens when a father decides the risk of staying is greater than the risk of leaving? Could one man outsmart a surveillance state that had watched his every move for 40 years? And if he failed, would his family disappear into the system forever? Jenkins wasn't the only pawn on the board. The regime had been collecting foreigners for years. Abductees from Japan, defectors from the South, assets to be traded or displayed. Among them was a woman who would change the calculus of his survival. Soga Hitomi was abducted from a Tokyo street in 1978. She was 22 years old. She was walking home. A car pulled up. Men grabbed her. She vanished. The State Security Department took her to North Korea. They trained her. They used her. They kept her in a facility similar to Jenkins. She was a prisoner. She was a resource. She was alone until 1980. Until the regime decided to pair her with the American deserter. They thought it was a good idea. Two foreigners, together, easier to monitor, easier to control, less likely to run. This wasn't a romance. This was two captives recognizing each other. Hitomi had been abducted from a Tokyo street. Jenkins had been trapped since 1965. They married inside the compound, a ceremony overseen by handlers, a union sanctioned by the state. They had two daughters, Micah and Brenda, born inside North Korea, citizens of a country they couldn't leave, daughters of a father who wasn't free. The stake escalation was immediate. One life at risk became 4 lives at risk. Jenkins couldn't just think about himself anymore. He couldn't just plan for his own survival. He had to plan for Hitomi. He had to plan for the girls. If he tried to escape alone, they would be punished. If he failed, they would suffer. If he was caught, they would disappear. The regime held them all. The regime owned them all. The leverage was absolute, but the motivation was stronger. Jenkins wasn't fighting for freedom anymore. He was fighting for his family. They lived together in the compound. They raised their children. They taught them English. They taught them about the outside world. They told them stories about America, about Japan, about freedom. The handlers watched. The cameras recorded. The state approved. They thought they were creating loyal citizens. They were creating witnesses. The girls grew up knowing they were different, knowing they were trapped, knowing their father was from somewhere else. They knew the walls. They knew the guards. They knew the rules. And they knew that one day they might leave. Night after night, Jenkins tucked them into bed. He whispered stories of beaches in California, of snow that wasn't guarded, of stores filled with food you could choose. Micah would ask, "Is America real?" Jenkins would say, "Yes." Brenda would ask, "Can we go?" Jenkins would say, "One day." He didn't know if it was a promise or a lie, but he had to make them believe it. Hope was the only ration that didn't run out. The years bled together. 1990, 1995, 2000. The regime tightened. The famine hit. The guards grew thinner. The walls grew higher. Jenkins watched the cracks form. He saw the hunger in the eyes of the personnel. He saw the system fraying. He realized the window was closing. If he waited too long, the door would seal forever. If he moved too soon, they would die. He had to time it perfectly. By 2004, Jenkins had been inside North Korea for 39 years. He knew more about the regime than any living American. He knew the State Security Department's operations. He knew the Propaganda Bureau's methods. He knew the abduction programs. He knew where the camps were. He knew how the defectors were treated. He knew what happened to foreigners who saw too much. And he made a decision that would either free his family or get them all killed. They would escape. The plan was simple, dangerous, desperate. They wouldn't cross the DMZ. That was suicide. They would go to China, then to Japan, then to the US. It was a long route. It was a risky route. It was the only route. Jenkins spent months preparing. He saved food. He saved money. He saved hope. He told the girls what to do. He told Hitomi what to say. He told himself to keep moving, no matter what. No matter who got in the way, just keep moving. The escape happened in July 2004, night. The compound is quiet. Jenkins signals Hitomi. They move. Boots hit the gravel. North Korean gravel. They reach the river. The water is ice cold. It bites through their clothes. They wade through, chest deep, holding breath. A spotlight sweeps the bank. White light cuts the darkness. They duck underwater. Bubbles rise. The light passes. They climb the Chinese bank. Mud slicks their hands. They don't stop. The current pulls at their legs. The mud sucks at their boots. Every step is a fight against the river and the fear. Behind them, the lights of North Korea fade. Ahead, the darkness of China waits. They traveled through China. They avoided police. They avoided checkpoints. They avoided attention. They were ghosts. Again, just like 1965. Just like the beginning. But this time, they were together. This time, they had a destination. This time, they had a goal. They reached Niigata, Japan. They walked into a police station. They surrendered. They gave their names. They gave their story. They waited. The tension peak was absolute. Would the US imprison him? Would North Korea try to retrieve them? Would Japan send them back? Jenkins stood in the station. Hitomi held the girls. They waited for the verdict. They waited for the judgment. They waited to see if 40 years of survival was worth anything. The US military was notified. The Army was contacted. The file was opened. The deserter was back. And the Army had two choices. But here's what Jenkins didn't know during that wait. The US had already made up their mind. They had been watching his propaganda appearances for decades. They had been analyzing his speeches. They had been tracking his movements through defector reports. They knew what he knew. And they knew that locking him up would bury that intelligence forever. So the decision wasn't about justice. It was about extraction. They needed what was in his head. And they were willing to pay the price to get it. The handcuffs stayed in the holster. The cell door stayed open. But the interrogation room was waiting. Would the Army imprison him for 40 years of desertion? Or had his survival inside North Korea just bought him the one thing no deserter ever gets? Okinawa, 2004. A sterile interrogation room on the US military base. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, a low electric buzz that drills into the skull. Jenkins sits in a metal chair, cold steel against his palms. His hands are clasped on the table. He's waited 40 years for this moment. Across from him, an Army officer opens a file. The thick manila folder contains 4 decades of desertion reports, propaganda transcripts, and intelligence assessments. The officer doesn't reach for handcuffs. He doesn't read charges. He slides a single piece of paper across the metal table. The paper slides with a scratch. The verdict was a dishonorable discharge. 30 days confinement. No prison time. Despite 40 years of desertion. Despite the laws. Despite the rules. The Army let him walk. Why? Because his testimony about State Security Department operations, propaganda bureau methods, and abduction programs was worth more than a court-martial. The officer leaned forward. "You're free, Jenkins." Jenkins didn't move. Just like that. Just like that. The payoff was institutional. The US military didn't let him go out of kindness. They let him go out of strategy. Jenkins debriefed for months. He told them everything. He told them about the camps. He told them about the abductions. He told them about the propaganda. He told them about the system. He gave them intelligence that no spy could ever gather. He gave them 40 years of insider knowledge. He gave them the truth. And the truth was worth more than punishment. He told them about the abduction programs in Japan. He told them about the camp locations. He told them about the propaganda methods. That was the intelligence. That was the value. The reframe was complete. Jenkins wasn't a traitor anymore. He was a survivor. He wasn't a deserter anymore. He was a witness. The system he deserted ended up needing what he saw. The regime that trapped him ended up losing him to the light. He didn't escape North Korea. He escaped being erased by both sides. He escaped the US prison. He escaped the North Korean compound. He escaped the silence. He walked out alive. Jenkins died in 2017 on Sato Island, Japan. At age 77, he lived his final years in freedom, with Hitomi, with his daughters. He worked ordinary jobs. He lived a quiet life. He didn't seek fame, fortune, or a place in the history books. He sought peace. Just peace, and he found it. But his story leaves a question behind. It's not about him. It's about the others. 4 American soldiers crossed into North Korea in the 1960s. 3 of them died inside. Jenkins was the only one who walked out alive. The exclusivity is the point. He's the only one who ever did this. The only one who survived. The only one who told the tale. The other 3 are gone. Their stories ended in the dark. Jenkins's story ended in the light. He's the only American who walked out alive. The State Security Department still exists. The Propaganda Bureau still operates. The abductions still remain a scar on history. But Jenkins saw them. Jenkins knew them. Jenkins exposed them. His 2 daughters live in Tokyo, working ordinary jobs, raising their own children. They are free. They are safe. They are alive because their father survived. Because he made the choice. Because he took the risk. Because he walked out. The number that matters isn't when he died. It's 40 years. 4 decades inside the world's most paranoid dictatorship. 4 decades watching, learning, surviving. 4 American soldiers defected to North Korea. 3 died. 1 lived for 40 years and walked out.